Coming up Thursday on Dan Wootton Tonight, after Meghan and Harry's hypocrisy and disinformation campaign was exposed in court, the Duchess's distraught dad, Thomas Markle, weighs in on the bombshell revelations. Plus, US broadcasting icon Megyn Kelly breaks down some of the biggest stories across the Atlantic and gives a stateside view on the week's homegrown headlines. That's Dan Wootton Tonight from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Monday to Thursday on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Very good evening to you. It's 8 p.m. on Brazier tonight as 3 MPs are slated for allegedly getting so drunk on a flight one had to be taken off by wheelchair. Are we becoming a nation of Puritans? Also, as Poland celebrates its National Day, why does Western Europe seemingly fail to understand those who fear invasion from the East? And the tulip wilts, plans for Europe's second tallest skyscraper, yes, named after the flower, get binned by Michael Gove. All that's coming up, but first a news update with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Your latest GB News this hour. Millions of people have observed a 2-minute silence today to remember the men and women who lost their lives in conflict. Marked each year on the 11th hour of the 11th day, on the 11th month, people across the UK pausing to honour those who died in conflict. And you saw in our pictures there the Duchess of Cornwall joining hundreds of veterans at Westminster Abbey. It was also confirmed today Her Majesty the Queen will be in attendance at the Remembrance Day service at the Cenotaph on Sunday. In other news today, Border Force officers have now intercepted at least 25 migrant boats attempting to cross the Channel today, carrying up to 50 people on each vessel. It's been reported that 4 small boats also made it ashore, landing on Deal Beach in Kent. There's been an influx of migrants trying to reach the UK in recent days, with 1,200 crossing the English Channel in the last 48 hours alone. Yorkshire County Cricket Club has confirmed that Chief Executive Mark Arthur has resigned. It follows a report that found former Yorkshire player Azim Rafiq was a victim of racial harassment and bullying at the club. The board say they're now looking for new leadership, and that's going to be vital in driving the change they need. Ahead of the final day of the COP26 summit in Glasgow, the President, Alok Sharma, said time is running out, but that talks are now focused on finding a way forward. However, a former Labour leader says delegates need to salvage what they can from the conference. Ed Miliband added, the conference is unlikely to deliver everything that had been hoped for.
I think the challenge is the science, and the science tells us we've got to halve emissions this decade. To do what they needed to do, and the scientists tell us we're about a fifth of the way there, which is just not nearly far enough.
Tens of thousands of care home staff in England are facing job losses as COVID vaccinations for carers becomes a legal requirement from today. Staff must be double jabbed to work unless they're medically exempt. It's estimated more than 50,000 current workers have not received both doses, although nearly half have received a single jab. The move comes as the sector faces severe shortages, with some quitting in advance due to the new policy. And some good news for Christmas time. The latest biodegradable and sustainable product is now available to help us celebrate. Cambridge University have found a new way to make non-toxic vegan glitter from the cell walls of plants we have isn't environmentally friendly, we're told. It's made of toxic materials and contributes to plastic pollution. You're up to date. I'm back in an hour.
We kick off the news tonight with this one. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has written to the opposition after two SNP MPs and a Labour MP were accused of getting drunk on an official visit to Gibraltar. The Labour MP Charlotte Nichols. Several newspapers carried reports suggesting that Ms Nichols had to be helped off with the assistance of a wheelchair. Witnesses suggested the three had been drinking heavily at Heathrow before takeoff and continued to do so during the course of the flight. Mr Hendry and Mr Linden are said to have become argumentative when officials queried their COVID documents. Their behaviour was described as being rude and leery. The trip was organised as part of an armed forces parliamentary scheme. And it's understood that a complaint was made about the MP's behaviour by civil servants. But the claims are disputed. Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon described them as false, and her two MPs said the allegations amounted to a smear campaign. Labour has yet to comment officially, but it is known that Charlotte Nichols did cut her visit to Gibraltar short and has since said she'd been taking medication when the alleged drinking session happened. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, said the trio's conduct risked, quote, undermining respect for Parliament. Let's turn to the journalist and commentator and former MSP and MEP, Brian Monteith, who joins me now, as you see. Brian, a very good evening to you. Appreciate your time, as ever. Evening. I want to take a slightly contrarian line on this, if you don't mind. You're welcome to take whichever line you prefer. But I just wonder whether perhaps we are setting the bar of sinfulness quite low now. These are three MPs, and, you know, however drunk they got is a question for them. But there was no sense in which they've fallen foul of somebody filming them with a smartphone doing something rude and horrible. There's no conflict. Nobody's got into a fight. Are we becoming a little too puritanical?
I think this is all, you know, becoming a sort of mud wrestling fight, where not only have these three MPs been accused, but the counter story now is that some Conservatives got drunk later on. It's really dog bites man. I'm not quite sure what the story is. I've been on a number of these trips. I've had a few beers myself on them. This is par for the course. MPs, politicians go on junkets and they get carried away and have a drink. Whether these particular MPs did or not, it's obviously very helpful to the government that it's happened on this trip to mark remembrance and to distract from other concerns. Who knows the truth of it? But the idea that politicians might go on a trip abroad and stay sober is actually harder to believe.
Do you speak from any personal experience, Brian?
Well, I was a member of the Scottish Parliament with Ben Wallace sitting next to me. He too was a member of the Scottish Parliament. But what goes on trip stays on the trip. So I'm not saying anything.
Well, I tell you what, and that I won't probe any further in that regard. But it seems to me There is a danger of setting up a hostage for fortune here, because, as I say, if the bar of sinfulness is really so low that we are saying that if MPs have a drink, and judging drunkenness is famously difficult, but if we are setting the bar that low, then who's to say? I mean, politicians of all stripes and colours enjoy a drink, just like the people they represent, and this isn't just something confined to one or two parties.
Well, indeed. And of course, it also falls down to the media too. Normally, what happens on these trips is when there are media with them, that they're drinking with them too. And so anything that happens, people basically zip it and don't really say a great deal about what happens. The fact that this has come out at this time, I just find rather strange. And it's no surprise to me that the SNP are saying, well, it's actually not coincidental. What struck me as more odd was that the SNP members actually got into camouflage fatigues of the British Army and posed for the camera. Now, I'm sorry, but actually for many of the Scottish Republican supporters of the SNP, that's more concerning than them getting drunk.
I'm going to try and make the case, if I can, for booze as a social lubricant, even for politicians. I mean, all the usual caveats. Booze can be taken to excess, and it can do terrible things. It does do terrible things, obviously. But there's an element here of, as it applies to parliamentarians, that if it helps break down party pre-boundaries, if it helps people reach across the aisle. And, OK, there were no Tories involved in this, it seems. It was a Labour MP and a couple of SNP MPs. But, they see each other as human beings rather than just robots from another party.
Yes, that's undoubtedly true. The reality of politics is behind the debating chamber, behind the committee fights, that actually the politicians are together in bars in the main, drinking with each other, making friends with each other across those divides, finding out each other as human, that actually they have real concerns. It's only one or two who actually despise each party and won't speak to anyone from each party. That's actually, I find, a rarity. And in the end, you often, as I did certainly, find that you have closer friends from other parties than many of your fellow colleagues who, of course, were constantly stabbing you in the back.
Brian, you paint a very vivid and I dare say very true picture of life in politics, sober or not. Brian, thanks very much indeed. Brian Monteith. Now it's time for the Brazier angle. Six years ago, more than 1 million people were beckoned by Angela Merkel to start a new life in Germany. Unfortunately, she hadn't asked if that was okay with the nations through which this mass of humanity would pass. Some took the view that the simplest thing to do was to make it as easy as possible for migrants to move through their territory, the quicker to become Berlin's responsibility. Others were decidedly prickly, what with it being their land and all. Budapest especially, in scenes that are being repeated right now on the Polish border. I ducked a few rocks as Hungarian riot police clashed with migrants on their border with Serbia. Well, eventually, many of the migrants got the message and chose a line of lesser resistance. They skirted around Hungary and got into Western Europe via Croatia. Some of them will now almost certainly be living in Britain. Why didn't the Hungarians just open their border gates and wave the migrants through? Well, the same question's being asked right now of the Poles. At one level, the situation is very different. In 2015, there was a widespread belief that Germany was making a big-hearted response to a humanitarian crisis in Syria, even if a great many of those on the move were actually from the Balkans or Bangladesh. But 2021 is obviously different. The migrants on Poland's border may be from the Middle East, but they are being used as pawns in a row between Putin-friendly Belarus and EU and NATO member state Poland. But there is a key component to this story that we in the West overlook. In fact, we don't overlook it because that suggests we know about it in the first place. No, this is something we fail to see because we in Western Europe are all too often ignorant about the culture and history of Eastern Europe. It's an unknown unknown. So let me take you back to 2015 and Hungary. I remember travelling south from Budapest to the Serbian border in the company of a local driver and translator. As we drove along beyond mobile range, our only way of keeping in touch with events was through the radio in the car, which we listened to on the hour. One day at noon, the local station didn't start with the headlines. There was instead a long, solemn pause, followed by the chiming of a bell. Where, I asked, was the news? My translator explained this was the news, but from about 3 or 4 centuries ago, when Hungary finally threw off the yoke of their hated Ottoman Muslim occupiers. Today, we in Britain remembered Armistice Day. If we can vividly call to mind events more than 100 years ago, is it really so surprising if parts of Eastern Europe still cleave to events 3 times distant? And as with Hungary, so with Poland, which is today celebrating its National Day of Independence. When Britons think of Poles riding to their rescue, they probably think of the time a Polish plumber was willing to answer an emergency call out that nobody else would. But in Poland, their thoughts turn to something grander. The charge, the biggest cavalry charge in human history, led by the King of Poland, John Sobieski, to relieve the Ottoman siege of Vienna in 1683 and deliver Europe decisively and finally from a millennium of Islamic eastward expansion. They remember it still, far better than their more affluent Western neighbours. In fact, the Poles have been struggling recently to persuade the Austrians to accept a huge statue of John Sobieski. The Viennese were apparently leery of offending local Turks. Well, the idea of occupation is alien to our island nation, but for many Eastern Europeans, it's a tangible historical reality. If not invasion by the Ottomans, then the far more recent arrival of Soviet tanks. The Polish in particular look back at their history and see reasons why Western Europe owes them not just understanding, but gratitude. Not just King John Sobieski at the gates of Vienna, but more recently, Józef Pilsudski, who stopped the Bolsheviks from exporting the Russian Revolution to the West at the start of the 20th century, and the Polish Pope, Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II to you and me, who led a spiritual uprising that mortally wounded the USSR in the latter half of the 20th century. Do they see themselves as the defenders of Western civilization? Is that why there are 15,000 Polish soldiers tonight shivering in the dark forests of their frontier with Belarus? I have no idea, but I do know that those who airily dismiss Poland or indeed Hungary as xenophobic in resisting migrant flows are being intellectually incurious. The East is not the West, their history is not our history, although when it comes to the migrants passing on Poland's borders, the problems might soon become ours. That's tonight's Brazier Angle. Well, to discuss this, Jakub Lahert, who's a journalist and editor-in-chief of Trimarium. He joins us from Warsaw, as you see. Jakub, thanks so much for your time this evening. Independence Day in Poland, what does it mean to you?
Thank you very much for the invitation. Yes, so at the beginning, I have to say that it's very false that today we're celebrating 103rd anniversary of our independence, and we still feel a fear of our future. What's happened? What's happened on our borders? So in fact, you told about this migration crisis in the Balkans, and you mentioned that it's something completely different. What's happened right now in Poland? Yes, it's true. It's something completely different. We have to remember that, in fact, it's a part of the hybrid war of Russia, which is run by hands of regime of Lukashenko. In 2010, Belarusian KGB prepared something what was called lock operation. It was the idea to send migrants to destabilize the situation of the European Union and NATO. And at the moment, the Belarusian regime found a great opportunity to finally run this operation. If we take into consideration the harm sanctions, which are on the side of the European Union, the UK, the United States, which are directed to stop the brutality of the Belarusian regime, we know that they need to find some solution to have an option to create their own policy, because Lukashenko is in a trap.
Well, he is in a trap, and we can talk about that some other time. Jakob, but we haven't got very much time left. I want to clarify a couple of points. One is that we've just been running pictures from the Independence Day march in Warsaw today. I think something like 100,000 people are on the streets. There are those who say it's a far-right movement. I don't know whether you dispute that or would endorse that sentiment, but it was certainly a very large turnout of people. But the more important point, once you've addressed that, is this bigger question as to whether we in the west of Europe understand the historical anxieties that you in the east of Europe have about a perceived threat from the east, whether that's going back to the days of the Ottoman Empire or more recently to the Soviets.
Absolutely, the way is completely different. Like Poland as a country which suffered from first the occupation in the 19th centuries, when was the time when Britain was an empire and had a great opportunity to develop during the technical revolution. For Poland, it was the time of domination of empires. Then it was the time of communism. So our history for sure is different. But when we transcendent.
No.
And
when we're having too many problems with the sound quality. I do apologise, but we got the gist of what was being said there. Well, 1,200 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats in the past 48 hours. Almost 700 people crossed Wednesday, with 504 making the crossing on Tuesday. GBNews has been told at least 25 small boats have been intercepted in the English Channel today. Last Wednesday, 853 migrants crossed into British waters, the biggest incursion in a single day. An official source told GBNews the numbers crossing today may well top that record figure. The number of migrants who've crossed the Channel this year now fast approaching 23,000, almost 3 times the number intercepted during the whole of last year. As our Home and Security editor Mark White reports, the growing crisis is putting strain on the volunteer lifeboat crews who are now often responding to back-to-back calls.
Well, here at Dover Harbour, another Border Force vessel has just come in. More migrants are being taken up this gangway here for processing. We can see them just towards the top of the gangway here. They're taken to a processing centre which is just round the corner in a white tent there. That's a temporary processing centre. It's being replaced by a £2 million processing centre that is due to open in the coming weeks. That tells you what the Home Office is expecting in terms of more migrants continuing to come across the Channel. And it has been another very busy day of multiple boats coming into British waters and being intercepted by not just Border Force but also by the lifeboat, as we see another group of migrants there making their way up this gangway, having been intercepted out in the Channel. They were brought ashore by the Border Force catamaran Hurricane, and as they make their way up the gangplank, I can see that the Dover lifeboat is also coming into the dockside as well, with a view to offloading the migrants on that boat. Now that has gone to calls related to a couple of boats, we believe, in the Channel in distress. You can see that that boat is absolutely full. They're on the bow, packed up on the bow, on the stern of the Dover lifeboat as well. More migrants sitting down at the stern. For these lifeboat crews, it has been relentless. This is a volunteer service, remember. They give up their time to respond to emergencies at sea, but for them it's been back-to-back calls, day after day, really testing, of course, their resilience and the goodwill of their employers to let them out for effectively all day as they answer one call after another. It is unsustainable. The Home Secretary says that she is determined to get to grips with this particular problem, but so far it seems that everything the Home Office does, talking to France, trying to put more in the way of border force vessels out there, is not having an effect. They're still coming, and they're still coming in ever greater numbers.
Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, there with some amazing pictures and commentary from Dover, not for the first time. After the break, plans for Europe's second tallest building to be built in Britain blocked by Michael Gove. We talked to a leading architect who thinks that was a mistake.
Coming up Thursday on Dan Wootton Tonight, after Meghan and Harry's hypocrisy and disinformation campaign was exposed in court, the Duchess's distraught dad, Thomas Markle, weighs in on the bombshell revelations. Plus, US broadcasting icon Megyn Kelly breaks down some of the biggest stories across the Atlantic and gives a stateside view on the week's homegrown headlines. That's Dan Wootton Tonight from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Monday to Thursday on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. A British whistleblower has been fired by the United Nations after accusing the UN of handing China the names of Uyghur dissidents. This is the case of Emma Riley, a 42-year-old human rights lawyer based now in Paris, who'd worked for the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. She claimed that Uyghurs who came to the UN with information about the genocidal activities against them in China had their names ultimately passed on to Beijing, which then put pressure on their families, amongst other things. Well, Emma Riley joins me now to talk about this. Emma, thanks so much for joining us. I'm looking at the words of a spokesman for Secretary General at the UN, Antonio Guterres, who said that the UN is not in the business of firing whistleblowers. I'm guessing you disagree with him.
I do. I actually think his boss might as well. I met Antonio Guterres in person in February 2020 in front of witnesses, and he said I was a whistleblower. So it's curious that his spokesperson is now saying the opposite. Furthermore, in July of 2020, I was determined by an independent UN mechanism to be a whistleblower. They may now not like that finding, but they can't change history.
And what your essential contention, Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, is that people planning to come to the Human Rights Council, who you would expect to have their confidentiality for obvious reasons respected, because they were going to the Human Rights Council with allegations about what was happening to the Uyghurs in China. Well, then, why would their names be passed on to the Chinese? It makes no sense.
Very good question. Every other country that asked didn't get names. Turkey asked, they didn't get names. This was an exceptional policy uniquely for China. It was a secret policy. It is ongoing, according to all of the evidence. The UN has never investigated this. In court, the UN admits that it still does this. The Chinese diplomat didn't think they had the right to this information. They explicitly wrote to us asking for a favor. I suggested to my boss that we give the standard response that we don't hand out that information, and I was overruled. They decided that because it's China, and I quote, they didn't want to exacerbate Chinese mistrust against us, that the favour would be done. The names were handed over weeks in advance of sessions of the council for those who had family members still in China, including, incidentally, UK citizens who still had family members in China. Their families were subjected to Chinese police turning up at their doors, requiring them to phone their family members, telling them not to speak. People were tortured. People were arrested, disappeared. Some people have disappeared into the network of concentration camps. And the UN thinks there is no need to investigate this. None of these facts are disputed in front of the UN's internal tribunal. In front of that tribunal, the UN has its position is that it has to give names to China, and it is unreasonable of me to think anything is wrong with this policy.
So there's no sense in which this was a one-off, it was an aberration. This is an ongoing policy. Could happen today or tomorrow.
Yeah, and I've actually put online my conversation with the current Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada Al-Nashif, and she explicitly says that it is entirely up to UN unelected UN bureaucrats to decide on an individual basis whether or not to hand China people's names. They don't warn people. This isn't a public policy. This is done behind closed doors, but it happens as policy. What China wants, China gets.
What does this tell you about if you can intimidate, we don't know, do we, whether it's the Chinese intimidating the UN or the UN being super sensitive and therefore acting in a fairly sycophantic way. But it tells us something about the nature of international politics. If the most august multinational talking shop on the planet can behave in this way.
I think it does. I made the point to Antonio Guterres when I met him that international law isn't some kind of bargaining chip. We're meant to, human rights are, we say basically this far and no farther. These are the things we're absolutely not allowed to do. And the response of the UN is that the principles of do no harm, confidentiality, the independence of the international civil service, the idea that we should apply the rules equally, are all subservient to the mere possibility of a better political relationship with China. Human rights have been reduced to bargaining chips. And I think particularly on armistice today, when we're thinking about why the UN was formed in the first place, it's a great shame that the principles of the Charter seem to have no value anymore.
Emma, just on a personal note, I'm often curious as to what becomes of whistleblowers. You'd like to think that people would look out for them, that their sacrifice would be recognised, even rewarded. What happens to you?
Yesterday, the UN fired me for blowing the whistle. In order to do that, they had to place me under investigation. I was accused uniquely of telling the truth in public. I am not accused of lying. I was found to have told the truth in public, and that was sufficient to fire me. Everyone who gave names to China has been promoted and remains in place.
Wow. Maybe it's time to review how much money we give to the UN. Emma Riley, thanks very much. Plans for the second highest building in Europe have ended up in the bin today after the Housing Minister, Michael Gove, threw out a proposal for a skyscraper dubbed the Tulip. The scheme envisaged a 1,000-foot high, obviously flower-shaped tower in the City of London. The top of the building, a 12-storey dome featuring restaurants, bars, viewing gallery, some with glass slides connecting some floors. As this artist's impression shows, the Tulip included gondola pods, there you go, that would have looped around the building's exterior glass petals. Not for the vertiginous, I think. The developer has 6 weeks to appeal against the decision, so it's not completely over yet. Its rejection was partly because the building was, quote, a muddle of architectural ideas. Joining me now is Paul Finch, editorial director of the Architects Journal. Paul Finch, thanks for your time. We do appreciate it. A muddle of architectural ideas.
I don't think so. It's actually a very simple idea. It's a series of viewing platforms and observation decks, learning centres, restaurants and bars. The estimate was that it would be visited by between 1 and 1.2 million people a year. Evidence for that? Well, every time they open up the top of the Gherkin Tower next door by the same architects, Foster and Partners, there are queues, half-a-mile queues to get in. It would obviously have some merits as a popular attraction.
And in that sense, a dual purposing. I mean, this presumably was it predominantly office space, then with the top bit given over to recreational tourism?
No, it's really an observation structure. So it's a lift core. People go up to the top. That's what happens there. It's not pretending to be anything other than a kind of learning and tourist and sort of pleasurable experience.
Yeah, I mean, on one level, frivolous, but then a lot of the best architecture sort of is. It's playful. Why do you think it was thrown out?
Well, it's an irony that it's been thrown out by the Department for Levelling Up. In this instance, they obviously want to level down. This project was approved by the City Corporation, which is the local planning authority for the Square Mile Business District. They liked the idea of it. However, Mayor Sadiq Khan certainly didn't. He said it didn't have any architectural merit. I have no idea how or why he came to that conclusion. And in the end, the government stepped in to held a public inquiry, as a result of which the inspector said it was a brilliant piece of architecture, but on the other hand, it did a lot of harm, in his view, to the Tower of London. And his view has been upheld by the Secretary of State and the Housing Minister.
Paul Finch, does this change the tone, the background noise for architects thinking about working on a commission in London or the UK more generally? Does it say to them, actually, we're going to be a little bit more conservative. We think even in the City of London, where there are some obviously playful buildings, if you're thinking about putting something up here which doesn't quite fit the bill, try somewhere else. Take it to Dubai.
I think there is a sense in which if a building doesn't have a very obvious social purpose, it's going to run into trouble for all sorts of other reasons. For example, you might remember the controversy about the proposed Garden Bridge, which was supported by the huge majority of Londoners and all the opinion polls who loved it as an idea. But it upset a variety of people for all sorts of reasons. It ended up not being built. We've had a couple of other bridges that have now been abandoned in London. And I think the worry is, instead of London being the great place where things happen, its sort of slogan might be, well, London can't make it. And I think it's very unfortunate that there's a mayor who seems to think that if something isn't housing or it's not an office building, that there's something wrong with it. This is an absurdity. Cities up to a point are about sensation. They're about attracting people. I don't know if the mayor thinks that tourism is important to London or not, but I can tell him for nothing that it certainly is. And it's attractions like these which help keep that activity vibrant.
Is it not all also, Paul, maybe about differentiation, making sure that when there are so many, massively and rapidly expanding mega cities around the world, and some of them with a very laissez-faire attitude towards skyscrapers going up, that it's part of your brand. It's part. I mean, okay, you can say London's got its history. It's got lots of old buildings. People are drawn to London for lots and lots of different reasons. But when a film says London, and it's not just another shot of Downing Street or Buckingham Palace or St. Paul's, they're thinking of a skyline, and we think of the New York skyline, Hong Kong's skyline, etc., etc. And this was clearly a distinctive addition to that skyline and would have made the overall impression more distinctive, and that's got to be good.
Well, I think you make a good point. And actually, it was heritage, I'd almost call them zealots, who opposed the Shard office tower. They were not successful, and of course that's become an instant part of the London skyline. A lot of heritage people disliked the Gherkin when it was first proposed. I mean, the people at St Paul's Cathedral said that it was an inappropriate geometrical shape that somehow would compete with the dome of St Paul's. And the latest example of the new is allegedly always damaging to the existing is, to me, a quite absurd claim that this tulip would interfere with and take away from the qualities of the World Heritage Site, which is the Tower of London. The inspector's report, I don't know how he came to this conclusion, is that the view of the Tower of London will be spoiled as you cross Tower Bridge. Well, if there's one structure in London that interferes with the Tower of London in a very big way, it's Tower Bridge, 19th century confection, which has absolutely nothing to do with the Normans. So I have to say, you read the inspector's report, you think about the mayor says it's no good, the inspector says it's great design, but, and then you look at all the tall towers that have gone up in the City of London recently, which apparently do no damage to the Tower of London, but this one uniquely will. Why? Is it because it's a building devoted to pleasure? Is it a new Puritanism?
Well,
who knows?
We've already asked that question. We've already asked that question tonight in relation to another story. Glad you put it again. Paul Finch, top ranting. Thanks very much indeed. Paul Finch is the editorial director of the Architects Journal. You can follow that story on our website too. After the break, are shoppers being encouraged to dress modestly at Asda?
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, we've got a little while without a space story. I sense you've missed them. So tonight we bring you two for the price of one. We'll start with the latest private sector launch. This is SpaceX. Cue pictures. There we go. Blasting 4 astronauts towards the International Space Station earlier. as you look at those pictures, less good news from the public sector. NASA is putting back its planned moon landings, which it aimed to do by, well, the earliest by 2024. That was a Donald Trump pledge to, quote, no earlier than 2025. The space agency is also warning that the US, and this is rather more significant, that the US is falling behind China, which it says may now put astronauts on the moon before the US this time around, if you see what I mean, ignoring what happened with the Apollo space program. With us, as he often is, the author and space expert, Dr. David Whitehouse. David, thanks so much for your time. Should we start with the SpaceX launch? I mean, this is just so routine now. There's a deep reliability to what they do. It's tremendous.
SpaceX have, for 20 years now, been impressing the world. They launch regularly. They launch on time. Undramatic, routine ferrying 4 astronauts to the space station for the start of a long-duration mission, and everybody's happy about it.
Less happy news comes with the Artemis program getting back to the moon. One of the reasons given for the delay is legal action mounted by SpaceX's great rival, Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin, who feel they should have had a fair stab at putting the lunar lander together.
Well, yes. This is not a great surprise that it's not 2024. Even before there was the spat between Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, 2024 was looking a bit strained because there's a great deal to do. There are 2 important missions to fly before then. The first one is in February, where the capsule that goes to the moon is going to have an uncrewed mission flying around the moon. That's very important. And that has to be gotten out of the way before they can make future plans. But yes, the legal spat between Musk and Bezos caused NASA to be told to stop work on landing on the moon. And that lasted for about 6 months. And only fairly recently has a federal judge overturned Bezos's claim and said start work again. So it's not a surprise, and perhaps it's a bit of a relief that that it's no longer 2024 and could be 2025 or 26, because there is a great deal to be done. And in space, although it is good to have a deadline, and Trump is to be praised for speeding this up and actually getting some action started, you don't want too much of a deadline because, as we know from history, cut corners, rush too fast, and you get problems.
Don't we know from history as well, David, that competition is a great spur to progress? And I wonder whether the NASA administrator has been a little bit cute when he said that, well, looks like the Chinese might get back to the moon before we do. I mean, a bit of competition.
Yes. Well, the reason why America got to the moon in the first place was because they were racing the Russians. And that was probably the only reason why it worked in the 1960s. Now the Russians are a declining space power, and China has said that by the 100th anniversary of the revolution in 2049, it wants to be the world's premier space power. And they have the money, they have the direction and the momentum to have a good stab at that. Now, considering that the problems the United States has, they have to react to that. And they've been slow in doing that. I mean, we now know, for the first time, there are 2 space stations orbiting the Earth. One is the International Space Station, the other is Chinese. And there are rumors, as you mentioned, there are rumors that not only could China be the first nation to return samples from Mars to the Earth, but there is a rumor which has been going around and getting stronger in the past few weeks that they actually might try and land on the moon before 2025. And that, if that's got substance to it, that is sensational, and that will shock America tremendously.
It really would. There's a lot going on. You'll keep us across it, I'm sure. David, thanks so much for your time. David Whitehouse there. How much should supermarkets police the way customers dress? We've heard a lot in recent years about shoppers pushing their trolleys along, wearing nothing more than pyjamas, slippers and a smile. But today, smartphone footage from an Asda store in East London where a shopper was told that she was dressed inappropriately because she was wearing a crop top and showing her midriff. Here's the footage.
And you're saying that what I'm wearing is
No, because you are working without almost clothes. We can see your body almost.
I'm wearing what?
Yeah, no problem. Right now, manager is coming, manager of store, 9 shift.
This is what I'm wearing, by the way. So I don't respect myself, is what you said.
No?
I don't respect myself.
No, not because we are respect, but we have policy in ASDA.
Well, if they're stopping young women going shopping in crop tops, that's it. My children are going to starve. Do supermarkets have a duty to ensure shoppers don't offend other customers? It's their property after all, but if they were to have a dress policy, it would help to advertise it, wouldn't it? Who, if anyone, has the right to tell anyone else they are dressed immodestly, if that's what was going on there? Some questions. Let's get some answers if we can. Turn to the social commentator, Angela Epstein. Angela, good of you to join us on this one. What do you make of that footage?
It's obviously a gross miscalculation here on the part of the chap who was working for Asda. The young lady here, and I've looked at the pictures sort of more extensively. Yeah, she's showing a little bit of midriff, but, you know, some of us who have a bit of a middle-aged tum do that inadvertently when the old top rides up. So, no, Colin, you're supposed to say, surely not. Surely you're not in that
surely
box.
not. Surely not, Angela. Yes.
Okay, we can do it again. But in all seriousness, there is a serious point to be made here, which is how much sort of agency do supermarkets have, or places in public have, over the way that we dress. Now, I've got a bit of a beef with supermarkets in terms of telling us what to wear, because I really wanted them to tell us to wear masks at the early stage of the pandemic. And they wouldn't, because they didn't feel it was right for them to interfere with the shoppers' right to how they dress and what they do. And it was all about personal space, which was a gross miscalculation of judgment, again, because we've learnt now that masks have helped to sort of, to a small degree, stop the spread of the virus. So on the one hand, they didn't do that. But then here you've got a supermarket telling us how we should dress. I mean, we do have a bit of a kind of slovenly side to us here in the UK. You do see girls going out in rollers and pyjamas and blokes in string
you'll get people saying, well, you'll get blokes in their flip-flops and shorts looking less than appealing and aesthetically, lovely.
I agree. And I think that the issue is really what we're telling people about ourselves. Do we have self-respect? And also what we tell our kids. I always feel slightly bleak when I see women with kids or dads with kids and they're dressed in pyjamas or they're dressed in their string vest or just looking as if they don't care. Because if they don't care, why will the kids care? And I know sort of looks are not the most important things in life, but I also think there's a sense of interdependence and collective responsibility. We're a community, and it would be nice if we all respected each other in the way that we dress. But I don't think on this occasion this young lady was flouting any kind of laws of respectful dressing.
We come to a really important point at the end, and it gets slightly pointy-headed, but I think it is terribly important, that idea about how you codify morality. Whose job is it? And you get into that slightly murky territory. I'm a great believer in not having laws or the state wagging the finger saying this is how you ought to behave. But the alternative is that we encourage a sense of what is respectable. And that's sort of the organic accretion of lots of different opinions and tutting or not. And you can see, and that runs the risk of some people becoming, nanny in chief, being a finger wagger, a curtain twitcher. But I think I'd prefer that, to the state.
Sounds like a good job.
Yeah. I don't know. What say you?
Curtain twitching czar. I'm sure there's room for that in Boris's cabinet. But in all seriousness, I think we have to think about the concept of dress codes in general. Look, there are certain places you're presenting the news with a suit and tie on because this is a serious program. You're disseminating information. It has a responsibility, and there's a smartness that's required to go with that. Likewise, when you see other people in areas of professional life, we expect a certain standard of dress. And I don't think it's a terrible thing to sort of try and communicate that to all of us, that wouldn't it be nice to sort of just be a little self-aware of being a bit self-respectful and respectful of others. But equally, you can't have people saying, such a nuanced approach. If the top rides up half an inch above the midriff, does that mean that you're no longer allowed to go in and buy a packet of fags from the supermarket? So I think you're absolutely right. You can't go down the whole cliched nanny state with this, but we can take personal responsibility. I think there's a big difference between the state or the powers that be or supermarkets, whomever intervening, and us all taking a bit of personal responsibility and thinking, if we think better of ourselves, others may well do as well.
Angela Epstein there. Angela, got to leave it there, but appreciate your time as ever. Thanks a lot. First they came for our wood-burning stoves. Now it's Christmas lights, apparently, that we are being warded off for the sake of the environment. MPs say the modern fashion for garlanding houses with colourful lights is bad for the planet and makes winter light pollution worse. Fewer bulbs, and those that we do use ought to be on timers or dimmer switches, they recommend. Andrew Griffith, MP, Conservative chairman of the Dark Skies All-Party Parliamentary Group, said, whilst we all need some festive cheer, much exterior lighting is unnecessarily bright. And here comes the killer line. Had it been in place in Bethlehem, the three wise men would never have seen the stars, let alone be guided to the baby Jesus by them. Ba-dum. There will be some who think that in the depths of winter, it's good for our collective mental health to round a corner in the car and see a house blazing with welcoming lights. At the very least, it's sometimes good for charities, which some householders who decorate their properties donate proceeds towards. So what's it to be? Darker skies and less light pollution, or keep the home bulbs burning? Andrew Doyle is here. When you see one of those houses festooned with lights, fairy lights at Christmas, how do you feel?
It puts me off. I think just on a matter of taste.
Yeah.
It's not for me. I like things quite minimalist, a bit of an aesthetic. You know, this wouldn't be my judgment at all. I mean, it's interesting. It's where my mother lives. People seem to do this to such an extent that it's like a competition. It's who can have the most lights, who can.
What's wrong with that?
Well, it's very garish for one thing. But even allowing for taste. No, there's nothing wrong with that. Actually, it's quite harmless. It is sort of harmless fun, isn't it?
Your mind on in real time.
Yes, you are actually. No. I think that there's nothing wrong with a bit of harmless fun, particularly festive fun. This is clearly about the festive season. It does bother me when it's a bit too early. I think up in November, come on. I think nothing festive should happen before the Advent calendar, the first Advent calendar door is opened. I don't believe there should be any of that going on. You know, I was in my supermarket the other day. It's all Christmas stuff. Tinsel. No one needs tinsel in November. It's just not a requirement.
But there's a broader point for me here, which is that, and I don't sort of invoke the spectrum of mental health easily, but you know, winter, night straw in, all that sort of stuff, and the state saying, well, your wood-burning stove's got to go because of pollution, the Christmas lights, you know, could you not?
Exactly. They use the word killjoy when people describe
the joy's
this.
been killed.
And with good reason. This is not going to be a statement by an MP that's going to go down well. I think it's clearly a bit tone deaf. For one thing, no one's going to listen to it. Do you really believe that anyone who enjoys this kind of thing, and they're free to, and I was just being flippant earlier, people are free to do whatever they want, obviously, but do you think that anyone who wants to decorate their house in this way is going to listen to an MP or think, oh, well, the MP said I shouldn't do it, so I won't? Because ultimately it's nothing to do with the MP, is it? So they know, absolutely. And it comes across as just being very po-faced.
While we're on MPs, or maybe po-faced, well, not po-faced actually, let's throw up that poll if we can again. I'm bouncing you slightly on this, Andrew, because I'm not sure you're aware of this story, but it helps if we put it there we go. A trio of MPs slated for allegedly getting so drunk on a flight, one had to be taken off by a wheelchair. Are we becoming a nation of Puritans? I worry a little bit. You probably don't know the background of the story. 3 MPs, two SNP MPs, Labour MP, parliamentary flight to Gibraltar. They have a bit of a drink.
Yes.
That's disputed up to a point. It's not disputed that the Labour MP, I think, required a wheelchair to facilitate her egress from the plane. And they've not done anything really wrong, have they?
No.
People behaving as if they've, you know,
this is the thing.
Recalled.
I did read about this, and I did sort of think, I'm not sure what the problem is here. There was apparently reports that one of the MPs was a bit leery, a bit rude to a member of staff on the flight. Well, that's wrong, and that should always be discouraged. And I don't think that's appropriate for anyone to do, MP or not. But for MPs to get drunk, I've been drunk with MPs. You know, they're human beings. They're allowed to have fun. I don't think that's a problem. If you're going to go to Gibraltar, what else are you going to do? I mean, you know, it's quite a depressing place. So, I mean, you know, absolutely.
To our dwindling band of viewers in Gibraltar, I demur. Very fond of Gibraltar.
Fine.
Keep watching.
No, I like the monkeys.
We'll see Andrew off.
Okay.
That's all for tonight. Dan Wootton is next. Do stand by.
Evening. A lively Friday ahead tomorrow. Fairly gusty conditions. Most places seeing a few showers. Some places having a pretty soggy day. But some spots seeing a bit of sunshine as well. It's all courtesy of this area of low pressure that's moving in and ousting a little ridge of high pressure. These weather fronts bringing bands of rain overnight and the isobars squidging together, which is why the winds will be steadily picking up for most overnight. It's still pretty fine out there this evening across much of eastern England, but patchy rain for Wales, some heavy bursts of rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and those winds continuing to strengthen. That all adds up to a pretty mild night as well. Early in the evening, we could drop down to single figures across parts of the east, but by dawn, most towns and cities will be at double digits. Most will start grey, though, with outbreaks of rain. Certainly for a good part of Scotland, some heavy rain here. The rain should ease from Northern Ireland, but quite a wet day for parts of northwest England, north and mid Wales. Showers across the south, but a good part of the day here will be dry. We should see some sunny spells, lifting the temperatures maybe to 15 degrees. Generally 12 to 14, but feeling cooler because it will be quite blustery, quite boisterous, particularly when the showers come along. Plenty more of those showers around through Friday evening as well, but they do gradually tend to fade, so it's turning drier as we head into the weekend. Clearer skies across northern Britain will allow a cooler start to Saturday. Still a bit of a breeze early on. Quite a fresh breeze at times along those North Sea coasts, but generally a much calmer day on Saturday with sunny spells for parts of Scotland, northern England. Further south and west, quite a lot of cloud. Bit of drizzle is possible through parts of Northern Ireland. Temperatures still mostly around or a touch above average, and the winds will be lighter on Saturday, so it'll probably feel a little milder. Mostly light winds on Sunday could allow some fog to form. Fairly cloudy skies, but again, most places will be dry and bright. Goodbye.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can